Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aika, and I am very pleased to introduce the next part of our program. It's our panel on claiming breath and gaze. And we have three presenters. We have Sia Kweba with Inhale, Exhale. And you're going to have to teach me how to pronounce your last name. I apologize if I got that wrong. And Manyatsa Monyamane with a presentation on dialogue with women photographers. And then Nono, whose artwork you just saw in the previous segment, if you were with us. I suggest we get started with Sia. Are you there?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Hello.
Afternoon, everyone. How is everyone doing?
Good.
There we are. My name is actually Siyasanga Sandla Kweba. There's a whole story behind it. I was given that name in a meeting by three women actually. Their name means the hand of God, like literally. I don't know what everyone else was thinking about that, but yes, Sia Kweba. This is my first time. I'm extremely nervous. I don't like. I really but yes. Hello everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I thought maybe it's my Wi-Fi. I was like, oh God, like
No, don't
it's
worry
happening
about it.
again. Okay. So yes, my paper is titled Inhale, Exhale. It's actually an inhale exhale kind of a relationship between mothers and their daughters. You know, the complexities of our relationship with the women who love us and who we love, but at the same time who we have complex, intense relationships with, women that we do not want to call out, women who in turn internalize their, I don't know if it's to call it a negative aspect, or the negative learning they had to encounter and endure and then partake in as women. I always say this to people: listen, I do not know perspectives about other women, meaning whether it's, you know, white women, colored women, Indian women. I only know life through having lived as a Black woman. So yeah. So basically, should I don't know if one needs to read it or if I should just go through it, because I don't know how many minutes I have.
You have about 20 minutes, and whatever makes you feel most comfortable, Sia.
Okay, let me break it down to like bite-sized pieces. So the paper basically covers, you know, being raised in an era of women leaving their children with their mothers or with family members, and in turn how we as the children left behind never speak on actions or basically how we were raised. You know, you are told to be grateful that someone was there for you, and in turn how those relationships kind of, you know, they were built to have a security for everyone involved, for the child, for the mother. The mother being, you know, a teenage mother, you know, who had to go back to school or start university. This benefited, you know, the child as well to have proper childcare, because, you know, middle class to lower income families could not access proper childcare, and how our relationships with our mothers kind of falls through that. I really wanted to kind of take us through the notions of that journey. So as to say, like, who do you really belong to as a girl child? Like, who in retrospect should you be loyal to? Should you be loyal to the woman who birthed you or the woman who raised you? And it's really such an ambiguity of some sort, because the woman who birthed you will come back for you eventually if you are lucky. And the woman who raised you expects you to never leave. Metaphorically speaking, like, don't abandon her. Like, you can, like, when your mother comes and gets you, you can leave and go get yourself that journey, but like, do not leave her emotionally, do not leave her psychologically. Always be her child as well. So yes, so so basically, as a woman, I've struggled with that identity, and it's it has always caused some sort of a discourse, because personally I come from that. I am now a woman who was raised by a multitude of women, and when I say something, basically it's always, oh, you're saying that because someone raised you, your grandmother raised you, your aunt raised you, this person raised you. But and also my mother feeling like she was never permitted to be a mother until I'm almost 30. So it's only now that she feels the right to kind of speak out and use her voice. But I've always asked myself, when is the appropriate time for that? Like, when can women who've birthed these children and who were then raised by family members, when do their voices actually matter? Like, how are their narratives taken care of? The perception for children left behind is that, oh, your mother left you behind because she does not care about you or for you, or that she just didn't love you enough to take her with you. And as a child, basically, and especially as a girl, because when you're a boy, you kind of can fall on the males who are there, who tell you to shake it off, be a man, don't cry about it. Also, being raised in the Transkei. I don't know how many people know the Transkei, which is now Mthatha/Eastern Cape. The kind of especially in the villages, when I was a child, it was still no form of resources for women. Only a select few women could actually get jobs. Only a select few women were educated. Only a select few women were of high society or looked at in terms of respect and dignity. So when we kind of navigate those churches, and I've always asked myself, like, who's building these societies that have so much negative connotations, and because now we are inheritors of those said buildings or emotional inhabitants, and then you find out that what you're inheriting as well. Like the person who is bestowing it to you does not know where it comes from, does not know why they need to do this, does not know, why it was done. And then you begin to ask yourself, who does this thing belong to? Like, is it ours? Is it mine? Can I then, remechanic it to kind of suit what I need in the now, in my lifetime? Is it wrong then to question these notions? I also want to kind of, my paper kind of deals with love. How when you come from those backgrounds, how do you then deal with love as a child, whereby you are always made to feel like your existence is a form of abandonment by someone, and who for all intents and purposes, whether or not they come back, this person will never explain to you the they will never really explain to you but what happened, because they themselves are holding traumas about leaving their child behind with their mother or their sister or their grandmother. For me, I've always looked at the relationship as well between, my grandmother and her mother. Fortunately for me, I was born when my grandmother's mother was still alive. And how basically what happened to them happened to my aunt and her daughter, and then later on to me and my mother. The kind of intricacies of how this is a repetitive culture of some sort, that, oh, okay, cool, she can't raise her daughter, so somebody else needs to raise her daughter for her. And then now the daughter has a daughter, and the same kind of perpetuation happens, like somebody else has to come and step in and raise, my grandmother's daughter, and the abuses that she went through under being raised by my grandmother's sisters, her aunt. And then again, the cycle kind of repeats itself. And now we are dealing with, like basically, now it's like a 5-generational thing, like between a 3 now. So for me, I've always asked, when is the right time to kind of say, okay, cool, we've tried it this way, it's not working. We need something new. We need a new wheelbarrow altogether. Like, it's the old one, it's fine, it works, it has been loyal to us, but now it's time to let go. My mother was saying to me the other day, oh, because I've never had a chance to be a mother, I want to raise your children. And for me, it kind of hit me like, why on earth would you still want to continue with something that we have seen emotionally is not working for these women, for us women of this family? This inheritance of, okay, cool, I will raise Bamban's kid because I did not get to raise my own. When do we then let go of our emotional baggage and the traumas that we've suffered? When is it okay to kind of say, granted, it happened, let's move on from that. So that's in a nutshell, that's what my paper is about. Inhaling to exhale, for me, kind of meant, picking up a protest of some sort. Luckily, I do not have any children. So I was like, for me, this notion needs to be protested against. There is nothing wrong with families, adopting, kids, but we also need to look at the negative connotations. How are, children loved within this setting? How are children spoken to within this setting? What are the words being used, to your child when in your absence? And as a mother who's left behind a child, what right do you have to interject, yourself into the situation? Do you ask questions, or do you silently sit there and be grateful that someone is doing this job for you of mothering? So inhaling to exhale is also, a stance of letting go and, breathing in acceptance of forgiveness. Breathing in acceptance that you yourself will need to ask for forgiveness. When do we start building, circles of healing and not being hurt as women, in families that, oh, okay, so I've raised your child for you, and now everyone is asking questions. Now everyone is ungrateful because no one is seeing the amount of sacrifices that I've had to endure while raising your child. Also, I feel that, people who raise, children in absentia of their mothers or their guardians or their parents kind of, need to kind of step back a bit and there's this whole notion of, oh, we don't want to confuse the child. The child, the truth itself will unconfuse the child. There's so much complexities when you are being raised by someone else, knowing that you do not belong to this person, knowing that your loyalties, even though lie to this person, understanding that you will have to divide your loyalties. So for me, that has been, the greatest takeaway. When do we exhale? Because also the form of inhaling is holding one's breath that something is going to fall apart. And when something falls apart, we are scared of what might come at us, what our real, what the real, what the real, what the real, what the real, okay, English just exited the building, but what feelings do we then have? Also, how basically, as communities raising, kids from other people, how do we best raise healthy children that can walk within society without being, I was watching the news on the killing of the student from Fort Hare. And for me personally, what really got to me was the parents of the perpetrator. I think it was the aunt who said, I am so shocked, and I'm just paraphrasing. She said, I'm so shocked because this is not how we raised him. And also to see the dismay on the mother. So it's always a tricky off-board situation. Is my time up?
Almost. Like, this is a good time to conclude.
So yes, and now I'm starting to ask these questions because I'm an aunt now, and I've done some raising myself, and I've had to constantly check myself when dealing with my nephew. Like my cousin, his mother, we had guests for December, and I just in a very calm voice said, Dotsie, can you please pick up your toys? People want to come and sit in the lounge. And he got up calmly and he packed up his toys, and my cousin said, how do you do that? Like, how does he listen to you so attentively? Can you teach me so that I can get that from you and keep it? And I said, no, like, I just tell him like what I don't appreciate, and this is a 2-year-old. So, you know, raising Undoxi for 6 months of COVID last year, kind of made me have questions on how I was raised between this generation of women. How I would have liked to see some, some personalities. I'm not, so yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, yes, this is a good place to hand over the mic. You just make me think of how, how we have the word maternal and paternal in English, and we don't have onternal, and there's literally no word for what you just did for your nephew in English, that is. So thank you for ending on that note, and yeah, bringing back that onternal energy and consciousness. Let's see if the dots will connect, because there are 2 other people on the panel, and it always looks like the themes will be separate, but they end up having these really interesting overlapping moments. So I would like to call on Manyatsa Monyamane. If you are ready, turn on your camera and we'll hear what you have to say about Lekotla.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Manyatsa Munyamani, and I'm a student at WITS. I'm currently doing my master's in fine arts. I'm also lecturing in photography at the Tshwane University of Technology. And yeah, so today I'll be sharing some of the writings from my thesis titled Lekotla, Intergenerational Dialogue with Black women photographers of South Africa. And I'll also share some of the visuals that I've done from the research and some that I'm currently also busy with. So, okay. Right. On 9th of August, 1956, in Pretoria, South Africa, women came from all over the country to march against an unjust system. Among those women, were any of them immortalizing this moment in photographs? Were any of them holding a camera? If so, where are these images? And where do we then find archives of their work? We have heard that Mabel Gqetu was an active photographer at that time. Could she have been one of the women at the march who documented this historic event? But where is her work? Where do we find her photographs? Was her archive intentionally wiped out, or did it not matter because she was somewhat unusual, a Black woman in a male-dominated field? Now, more recently, 2004, Neo Nzuma is the first woman recipient to be awarded a CNN Photojournalist Award for her photography. And in 2016, photographer and activist Zanele Moholi was named the most powerful woman artist in Africa by Art Review magazine. So my question is, who were the mentors of these women? Who inspired Zanele or Neo? And how did they formulate their way of seeing through the lens? The absence of this history is a current situation of looking into the past and also acknowledging changes in the present, seeing on how then do we connect the dots and also the missing links. These are some of my thoughts and the questions that spark the calling of this dialogue. So in 2004, I started playing around with the film camera I found at home, packed away in my grandmother's chest of drawers. The curiosity and pleasure of what might be after the click of a finger made me decide that photography would be a life journey for me. In order for this journey to have a strong foundation, I would have to study photography thoroughly. I knew a couple of great self-taught photographers, like the uncle, the one we called cameraman, or Radinepe, who came on his bicycle to capture us on film in our Sunday best and contributed to the memories and histories so beautiful and powerful, which now hang on the walls of our grandparents' living room. These are the photographers that inspired me to be a photographer. They were my only reference to what is called a professional photographer, and were the influence that led me to dig deeper, to find out who or what photography is, and how could I use photography. My 4 years of studying photography and undergraduate studies taught me different ways of seeing and thinking about photographs. The process opened whole new worlds to me, worlds to explore, uncover, and rediscover. Looking at all the materials I read and photographers, I realized that I was inspired by all male. I began a search for photography by Black women. As a Black woman photographer, I have found little to no reference to the existence or influence of other Black women photographers from a previous generation than mine in South Africa. The tangible absence of Black women photographers in documented history of photography and art is an uncomfortable reminder of the lack of visibility of Black women in the visual arts, and even more so in photography. I'm now going to share a video that I created, which was sort of my thought process thinking about, these women exist. I knew deep down that somehow they need to exist some way. So it was thinking around who could these women be, where could they be, what do they look like, what kind of, how did they dress when they went on assignment or when they went on shoots? Which streets did they walk? What kind of bags did they carry? And was there, some sort of a camera in that bag? Yes. Okay. So, okay, share. Which one
a ke gopole ke tsere ke mme snepe ga ke itse maybe ne se ke ba biteng ba o tsang den mara a ke gopole mo a ke gopole ka dikethile no na le dinepe tse ntši ga ke sa itse re bamo ya ona yona e kae ba dintsha di a timela wet ke kgale ke ka kgale hampe yo ba sa le teng kgale ba tsamaile
Okay, stop sharing the screen. So from here, what I did, going on the search to find these women photographers, a lot of what I did was through word of mouth. So I'd ask friends, I'd ask neighbors, I'd ask friends of friends, just anybody if they knew somebody who was a photographer, whether their mother was a photographer or their grandmother or aunt or neighbor. And at some point I wasn't winning. So I decided that, let me start the journey at home. So what I found interesting in my family home and many other Black family homes in my community of Mamelodi is that while growing up, the father figure was the one who photographed the family and then gave the woman, usually the mother, the printed images to arrange in an album, frame, or wall. This in so many ways showed me the relationship that women have with images, with telling a story, creating a history according to the way they see it, curating a lifetime of memories waiting to be told. I looked at the concept of the family album in relation to Black women, their contribution, and also the creation of images in their home, opening up a conversation about the importance of that role, whether it was a role given to them or one they took upon themselves, and why curating as opposed to clicking the shutter, looking deeper into their interaction with images. I hope that this conversation would disclose some hidden branches to this absence and perhaps a door to finding the Black women photographers. And indeed, through that process, I was able to find a photographer. So this was through the conversations I was having with the women, asking them questions about why are certain images in certain rooms, where are they, the negatives, are they in a box? So having that conversation, that's how I found a photographer who's actually one of the participants in this research together with 2 other women. And I'm just going to share a couple of the images that I photographed going into the homes of So these are some of the photographs, some of the homes where I found the woman and we spoke about their images, and they told a lot of stories behind the images. They spoke about certain elements, visual elements that are within the photographs, and also in the house as well. And it was very interesting just to hear the stories that they have and how proud they are of placing images, and that it's their pride and joy, and the stories behind it, and the history behind the photographs, the frames, and why are the works in certain rooms, and what do they represent, and the people in the images, who they are, and what they represent in their home, whether they are still alive or not alive. So those are some of the images that I photographed during the process. I photographed a lot of the images were in Mamelodi, Soweto, and the Vaal. So I'm currently developing an intergenerational dialogue with 3 South African Black women photographers. All 3 photographers practiced photography before 1994. Initially, while on this search, I had hoped to meet more Black women who engaged with the camera during that period. And for now, I have only physically met 3. Although many names are coming forward, I have decided to start this dialogue with the 3 that I have met and focus the research on them. So not to say that the names that have been brought to my attention will not be written about, but to say the main focus will be on the 3. One of the main themes explored in the dialogues is the word photographer or photography. How is it described in vernacular, and what is it associated with? Also looking at, do the photographers identify as photographers? How did they function and operated creating images during the apartheid period? How they went about defending or proving themselves in a society that I argue continues to underrepresent Black women photographers. The challenge, therefore, is to consider the concept of history when it comes to the absence of documented histories of Black women photographers and their work. The number of books published by and about Black women photographers are scarce. Currently, I'm looking for books and texts that can be useful as references that speak to similar ideas that I'll be touching on in this research. I have been doing video recordings of the interviews with the photographers, thinking and exploring how to present the information on paper and practically. The information that I have gathered thus far through the conversations with the photographers has brought about shifts in my thinking about the history and status of Black women photographers, mainly because the three photographers come from different worlds. I will play a few snippets from the interviews I've had with the photographers as an intro of who they are. The first photographer that you're going to see is Siobedi Ruth Mutau, who I first heard of in 2010. I knew at that moment that I wanted to meet her. I wanted to know more about the work that she does and, you know, the environment that she's in. And then only years later, I finally meet her at her exhibition. And even then, I did not know that she would be part of my research. And then during a crit session on my proposal for this research, a photographer mentioned that Ruth started studying photography around 1989 at the Market Photo Workshop. And then that's when I decided to get in touch with her. And then the second photographer, Mema Tsidiso Nzonga, who is one of the photographers that I found through the project that I've just shared with you now, exploring the relationship that women have with images and by sorting them in the photo albums and displaying them in their home. So while we were having a conversation about the photographs in her home, she mentions that some of those photographs were photographed by her. Excuse me. And then that's when the journey of hearing her story of photography began. And then the third photographer that you will see in the video is Goku Tabang, Esther Tabang, and I found her through marking one of my students' assignments, where the assignment, they had to do an interpretation of an image that they found at home. And behind the photograph was stamped 1976, photographed by my grandmother. So immediately I went crazy looking at the year that this was 1976. And it was, you know, a beautiful image. Immediately I got in touch with the student. His name was Collins. I asked him, is your grandmother still alive? Does she have more photographs? And from then on, he introduced me to his grandmother. So I'm going to share my screen with the video.
Tough. It was tough. I mean, imagine in the 90s, you know, having a camera. And sometimes we didn't even have money for transport. Owning a camera, it's something else, you know. But luckily, photo workshop had few cameras they would, you know, just give us. But luckily, I had my own. Thanks to my dad, who believed in me when I asked him to buy me a camera. He never even hesitated, you know. So, and I'm really grateful, because I don't know if he didn't buy it for me. So if I would have pursued it or whatever, you know. But with no question asked him, and he just bought it for me. Yeah. I you know, because Neo also says to me, you know, I never thought there will be somebody, and then until she met me on a story. And then came about Elizabeth, and then Elizabeth Sijake. It is they, you know, she's still around taking photographs. Now is still around taking photographs. And about Tobega, you know, they came very late, you know. And some of them, I became their mentors also, because, you know, because I think, Lina, if I had if I had a black woman by that time, I would have just easily made them my mentors, because, you know, just to show me the ins and outs of, you know, the profession or how it's done and assignments, you know. So, yeah.
Nna ke ikutlwa ke le not a professional photographer, mara he ke nkile di-photo from ke le monyane. Ke qadile bo mosebetsing for di-events tsa mosebetsing, hae for di-birthday tsa bana le ha ba hlaha ke startile jwalo ka nna ka nka di-photo. Lona jwale le ke se ke sa sebetse camera ntse ke di nka ka bo di-phone, ke a di rata di-phone, di-photos ho etsa collection ya tsona. E ne le Canon, ke na le example ya yona, moraka o na le yona ona jwale.
Batho ba bo mashisha magolo maila selele. Re bua mashishing a magolo maila selele. Maja thepe ka njana. Ra thoma lefaseng la mashishing ka ba le lekgowa le le bitsa go le isimane. Ba bona maisimane. Motho o ka go bereka le ena. Ra thoma ra tšea di-camera. Ga ke swere camera ke be ke e swere ka e ruta ke ena. Re sepela mo dipolaseng. Re tsamaya re shoota dinaga, diphoofolo le metsi. Metsi a ga bo rena re be re rema magora, ka Sepedi re le ke legora. Ga ke thoma go tšea bana ba ka camera ke ba laetša re le dinepe. Ke ba laetša re le dinepe. O tlo fihla le gona ke fihla Berlin. Morodi ya ka thoma berekiša camera. Ke bona gore camera e na le mogolo. Thoma e berekiša le yena e lesa talente ga e se ya gago. A re lesa camera. Setlogolo sa e tšea Colin. Thoma a tšea camera. Bona Colin o berekiša camera. Ke a thoma ka fatloga ke le Goku. Ntho ke be ke e dira mara ke berekiša camera mara ke sena mara se go botse sona. Ke be ke tšea ke re ga ke tšea ba e tswa difotwana. Ke ba bea ke re ke tlo fela ke ba laetša. Ke tšea dinepe ke ba bea fela ke re ke tlo go fihla le kono. Ba thoma ba bona gore Goku a riang.
So those are the 3 photographers that I'm currently in dialogue with. I've learned so much from them, and those are the first interviews that I've had with them. So I will be going back to continue having a conversation, looking at their work, and we'll see how it all unfolds. Thank you.
Manyaza, thank you very high. Thank you very much. You're speaking to Arona. I can't seem to, there we go. Hi, thank you very much for your presentation, and Sia as well. Thank you very much. Without wasting time, because we will have time, hopefully, let's just move to Nono for her presentation, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to have a bit of a discussion about the links between all 3 of your researchers and how that links to breath as a form of self-love and all these archives that we are now opening up to share stories with. Thank you very much. Nono, you can step in now. Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Manyaza. Thank you, Aruna. And Sia as well. Yeah, so I'll just get into it. There are so many questions that I long to ask my mother, but I don't know where to begin. This is not because she is as unapproachable as my father, rather because regardless of our closeness, I cannot bring myself to ask about things that might shift our relationship towards something which I might not have anticipated. And I am also not ready to answer certain questions that she too might be curious about. There's an elusive curiosity that has always characterized our relationship, one which becomes more tangible with the maturity of it, and I am afraid of what shifting that will bring. What will I do with the reality of her unhappiness? How will it sit between us? What will it shift? How much space does it require here? I want to ask about how it sat between Ausi and herself. Wonder, did she inherit it from her mother? How do I ask about the whispers of regret and exhaustion that I've heard at the corners of her desires, and how similar they sound to those which she says my grandmothers kept under their tongues too? Does she know this, that they sound the same? Can she not hear her own whispers? Every time someone exclaims how much of a particular thing in me reminds them of Mma, I am always reminded that I carry her name, and I continue to imagine who this woman whose name I bear, though have only ever heard about, really was. However, sometimes this is rather scary because I wonder if I inherited more than the texture of her hair and the tone of her voice, and if really, mara gape o hotse ho tlala ka leshata la basadi. I wonder what I have inherited from these women and what my muscles have refused to remember. And I begin to fear if they have kept anything from these women that has made them stay in all the trauma. I wonder what these things are that have made all the women in my family stay, and I wonder if I have them too, laying dormant in the texture of my approach to loving, waiting for the day its violence shows up. I wonder if I will stay, despite the certainty that I won't, because does one ever anticipate that they will? I want to ask my mother about how much I remind her of Mma. And if she thinks that Papa is really certain that I no longer carry his mother's calm in my voice. I want to be sure of this. And if she hesitates to confirm, I will tell her that the reason I've had an elusive proximity to romance is because here, between us, in our bones, we have a history of violence and staying in trauma and shame and fear and unknowing and staying and hurting and betrayal of love and duty and suffering and staying and exhaustion and staying and unhappiness and regret. And after all of that, still staying. And I am afraid to find out when the violence shows up, if I inherited any of these things. And I think that it will show up. I am almost certain of this because our story is a violent one and no one anticipates to stay. So then I just stand in the living room, careful to not make myself too comfortable in people's bodies because when they get uncomfortable, I want to be always able to find my way out, but I won't tell her this. So instead, I'll ask if she wants a cup of coffee and if she could help me make something to go with it. And maybe when I'm struggling to knead the dough, I'll ask her about the difficulties of marriage, where the 6 cups of sugar is too much to pour into love, and how much I should reserve for myself. If sweet things really do spoil quicker, and if so, how do I stop the rot because I like them sweet? And how much salt should I add to disinfect the wounds? And how high must I set the oven for the biscuits? And if I happen to burn them, where should I hide the body? Maybe I will ask this next week when we make Lidombolo again. I will try and ask. Or maybe I'll listen to her tell me about how Ausi never really taught her how to make pie. And she keeps asking Liseho to teach her, but she doesn't make it often, and then continue to tell me how much she would give to see her again. Her mother, that is. And I will look at her and wonder, really, how much hurt does this woman carry? How much pain could our bodies possibly hold before they collapse? I will do this. I will do only this. I will wonder. And maybe think about asking. Maybe next week the kitchen will become a holding space for these conversations. Maybe she will mistakenly spill hundreds and thousands of her tiny desires that we will mistakenly make joy from them all. Maybe we can feed each other courage, not the kind it takes to stay, but the kind it takes to cultivate joy, to nourish our bones. I wonder if she remembers how long it should be left to rise in the sun, if she remembers where to get the yeast from. If she doesn't, we might have to dig up graves and pull these recipes from Ausilimna's bones. But what if there is nothing to find there either but hollowness in them? What if they too didn't know how long it should be left to rise in the heat and friction and static? What if all their bones remember is how to knead kgotlello? What if the only things that their hair still holds in its fiber is all the pain that festered during their lives? Who then will teach us how to make delicacies? Because we are tired of these generational staples. They have too much struggle in their skin. I want a delicacy, hundreds and thousands and millions of them. And if they spoil, I will make more and feed them to my mother and place them at my grandmother's graves. And when we eat so much more than our bellies can hold, perhaps then we will begin to recalibrate the fibers of our muscles so that they too can hold and remember joy. The politics are located in love, and these politics are sociological. Today, I want to ask questions about love as a sociological practice. This week has been an absolute pleasure to hear people speak about their shrines and vulnerabilities in search of not mere definitions of love, but holistic practices of it. I went to a book launch of Tina Camp, and one of the panelists, Nomusa Makubu, whom in the short space of time I've known her, I can already say is just brilliant. She prompted us to think about the common phrase, a labor of love, more intently and politically. When we do that, we can begin to trace the phrase and ask what the fruits of the labor of this love are. To which Tina responded, relationships of care. And today I want to continue with the grammar of that question, privileging words, labor, love, fruits, and care, alongside my video series, Mapelo Ujele Serati. The series was screening during the video screening session earlier here, and I hope that you all got to witness it. And if you didn't, I will now be sharing stills of it, of the single channel video series, and I will also be posting a link to the virtual video exhibition in the chat box. I'm going to share my screen, if you could allow me. Yes. Oh, I don't think I can share my screen and read the present. Can I? I can. No. If can you guys see your sharing screen? I don't. Oh, I can't be on two screens at the same time. I can't read and. Well, isn't that quite interesting? I don't know how to do this because I'm supposed to be reading while showing the slides, but it seems like I can't do both at the same time. So I'm just going to quickly share the stills, quick, 2 minutes, and then I'll get back to the presentation. So the title series is Mapelo Ujele Serati. The first video being Ledombolo for one. And these are the video stills. Let's do, no. Everything's just going to complete shit. I want to view it in full screen. Yes, so that we can do this quickly. So this is the first video in the series titled Ledombolo for one, and then this is the second one putting this is the last one, Malana. I want to stay longer on the stills, but I'm also aware of time. Oh, and then this is Carrie Mae Weems, is the kitchen table series, which I will be briefly referencing. This is Rosla's Semiotics of the Kitchen. Yes. So with all of that in mind, I will continue with the presentation of what are the fruits of the labor of love and what are the politics of that labor. The series title, Mapelo Ujele Serati, is a Setswana proverb that loosely translates to one who has literally consumed their lover. The proverb is often said to speak about someone, particularly a woman, who was deeply enamored by another. I'm interested in the textures of intimacy and violence that are implicated in romantic love, and how my relationship with my mother and hers with her mother and their relationship with romance, and what a, and their relationship with romance, how I can bring all of these together to investigate what a Black vernacular romance looks like, departing with my own matrilineal lineage. And how can all of that possibly define my own romantic experiences? I wonder if there's such a thing as a generational romantic cartography, because our romantic stories in our family between us women seems so cyclical, and surely there's something more to that that is more than just, really making shitty decisions. Not to absolve myself or them from the responsibility of our shitty decisions, but, just using all of that to really create a grammar to tell these vernacular stories. So I think it all started realizing that growing up, I witnessed domestic gestures as a manifestation of love. My curiosities have then since been attributed to witnessing the domestic space as a violent and unending site of practice for the cultural duties of women, which I have witnessed to often be a disregard of self. These consistent domestic acts have been conflated by patriarchy to be an act of love, defining women's commitment to the domestic space as a measure of their commitment to the family. So one is for one. Here, the practice of culture and domesticity is a gesture of love, which can often become a practice of self-erasure. The video series engages with the metaphors of food, mainly, to explore how the abstract, intangible, and fragile thing that is love actually has a materiality and form, which I have defined, which I am going with its gestures. The materiality and form lays in the gestures of it, and how in those specific acts, the texture and politics of the feeling is woven. In the first video, there is a struggle. The first video, Yalitombolo for one, is a struggle in finding the time to serve ourselves when our entire lives have been dedicated to fulfilling particular roles. In Ledombolo for one, I explore notions of self-servitude and intimacy against those of domesticity to interrogate how love as a practice, how love can become a practice of self-erasure. I depart from Martha Rosla's semiotics of the kitchen, as we saw, engaging her concept of maintenance labor as erasure. The meal, Ledombolo, is a steamed bread that is traditionally prepared for a family or mass congregation. In selfishly making it for myself, it becomes a symbol for a resistance to serve, or at least the privileging of self-servitude. However, this proves to be a difficult act as the kneading of the dough becomes increasingly harder with every second. This is because I replace the main ingredient of flour with plaster of Paris. Therefore, the dough hardens around my efforts to serve myself. After an exhausted act of trying, I resolve to making a cup of tea. The cup, however, cannot hold. With the tea spills over the saucer and onto the doily. There is a metaphor of pouring our efforts and love into people that cannot hold us, where we leak onto the stickiness of the ground with our molasses intertwining with the dirt on the floor. I ask, what does it look like to be held? What does it feel like to be contained? The video is set against a conversation with my mother, where she's instructing me on how to make ludombolo. She speaks not from reading a recipe, but from pulling it from the bones of her memories. These recipes of generational staples live in our bones, in the ways that love and the trauma of it does. The conversations begins mirrored subtitles, which continue to lose themselves into a fabricated conversation with my mother about love. Fabricated because this is a fictional conversation I wish to have with my mother, not an actual one that I've actually had. This gesture of mistranslation between what's spoken and what's subtitled at the bottom speaks to all the earnest things that get lost in translation when we speak to our mothers about love. Things that get lost between the inherited cultural codes that frame our relationships with our mothers. Things we cannot ask, cannot say, which could possibly define us. The subtitles capture a longing for this intimacy by imprecisely translating the recipe she gives into one about how to make love for myself and how to gauge a pouring of myself into cups that cannot hold. The layering of these conversations captures the discomfort and vulnerability with our mothers because of particular cultural contracts inherited into our matrilineal relationships, which creates the frames in which we curate our behavior towards and around each other. The making of this work with my mother becomes a tool to investigate how these frames can be shifted between us. And I continue thinking through what Carrie Mae Weems in the kitchen table series that I showed said or was suggesting about the kitchen as a holding space for difficult and confidential conversations. Conversations between women for matrilineal intimacy, as well as a space where we could begin to reserve efforts for ourselves. Making the work, the video series, in itself becomes a holding space and practice of difficult conversations between my mother and I, because conversations just seem about love seem to be a lot more easier when, you know, it's under the guise of making a video. And then pudding, which is the second installation of the series that I showed, the pink one, the colorful one where we're feeding each other, continues the conversations in Ludombolo for one, of love and practice of self-erasure, developing it into questions about an inheritance of embodiment of a generational approach to love, a generational romantic cartography expressed yet again through embodied recipes passed down. The notion of consumption draws a relationship between generational recipes of traditional foods passed down orally and a normalized trauma that characterizes the marriages of the women in my family. A question of the trauma is one that has been passed down to me as well. I explore the act of me and my mother making a delicacy as a ritual that could possibly cleanse the traumatic repasts, where I begin to reimagine a more delicate narrative of love. The video is a desire for sweetness and romantic love. And I'm wondering how I'm doing with time. I think
you probably have about 2 minutes left, 2 to 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think in putting, I realized that Ludombolo in some ways didn't do what I wanted it to do. A part of Mapelo Ujele Serati comes from a space of observing the shapes in which Black women and women of color have been shaped as the subjects of love. It's as though we are not only undeserving of sweetness and tenderness, but we're incapable and unlovable. Our stories are often sore and violent, and this, to be honest, is true, you know, for the women in my family and other women. But with pudding, I wanted to speak about these desires of a sweet love. I wanted to move away from the traumas of Black women and romantic violence, among many others. In pudding, I wanted to speak about Black women and joy. Here, my mother and I make something for the sweet truths in our heart. Making that captures the hope of a diversion of a genealogical trauma in love that I sometimes think I could also hold in my muscles. The work is a desire for sweetness in romantic love. But I also ask, if generational trauma is a thing, then surely we can also imagine a generational joy. Malana is the last installation of the series, the red one. It explores the spoilage of food as a rotting of love and the consumption of a love that has gone bad. In the video, the chicken is a metaphor for the self in love and the messy work that is carried out in that love onto ourselves by ourselves. The video is an imagined ritual of cleansing the heart of bitterness and trauma experienced in romance. And then the last part of the presentation, I just want to return to the initial idea of self-erasure in Semiotics of the Kitchen, where Rosler claims that in performing domesticity, we name our own oppression. With this, let us speak about the politics of the labor of love. In Setswana, we recognize two forms of work, mereko and mosebetsi. Loosely translated, these mean the same thing, but they are not synonymous with each other. Mereko is a traditional ceremony, whereas tiro is work, or mosebetsi is work. The fruits of both of these labors vary, where one is a capitalist exercise, the other is a communal one of care and love, of holding and journeys and spirituality. This is also something that was in conversation at the panel, Nomusa. These forms of labor are not the same, and I want to propose that neither is domestic labor. I understand what Rosler says. I respect what Rosler says, and I agree with what Rosler says, because I will not romanticize domesticity. It is often a patriarchal practice that maintains a capitalist system. It is often work of self-erasure and dislocation. But in the same breath, I am beginning to feel like that is such a harsh statement that infantizes women. Our mothers, infantilizes women, our mothers to be specific. It takes away their agency in their ways of expressing love. And I think I realized this when I read a text that I wrote 2 years ago. I'm going to skip that text because of time. But anyway, maybe I'll post it in the chat. Returning to this text, I cringed. It feels so judgmental and narrow and harsh. I realized that I've always defined and shaped my womanhood in antithesis to my mother's, because I felt that for the longest time, my mother was merely a subject of patriarchy. One of my mother's expressions of love is domestic labor, and it is genuine because that is how she knows how to love. Through care, she feeds us because she cares. She washes our clothes because she cares. She cooks for us because she cares, and all the other multiple ways of, taking care of us. And yes, we can begin to question these languages of love and how women are taught to love differently to men. How between genders, love is framed within nurture and sacrifice and overextension for one, and provision and unforgiveness for the other, and how these are violent frames. I get that. I am not dismissing them. But I am saying that love is a social political practice, and I want to be empathetic of that instead of approaching domesticity as a rigid and linear exercise. It can both be an act of self-erasure and that of care, and love is not as simple as either this or that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nono. Thank you. So what comes up for me with all the presentations, all the panelists, is absence, the absence of history, the absence of the mother, the absence of love, truth, representation, recognition, knowledge. And so I'm going to ask I'm going to ask 3 questions, and they're for each one of you, and you'll hear the ones themselves. So Sia, you talk about deputy parenting, and about wanting to create protest around letting go as protest, which in essence also seems like a denial of, not necessarily a denial, but a need to wrestle with what Nono has just talked about letting go of trauma and accessing generational joy. And so I wanted to know, when you say parenting the parent, and when you talk about deputy parenting, what exactly is it that you're talking about, and how do you imagine letting go being a protest towards love? And then Manyata, it's also around the same thing, around the lack of recognition and all of that. You chose to, when you couldn't find the photographers, you looked at the space, essentially the space where your impulse came from, the home. and how women curated their homes and their spaces, using photographs taken by their male lovers, partners, and all of that. And that then led you into discovering, also through a male student, discovering other, a Black woman photographer in 1976, for example. So I want to know about what these new, they're not new, we've always had them, but these repositories of knowledge, these archives, embodied or in the home, how you intend on using them moving further, if there's a connection to that and the discovery of the 3 photographers that you found. I hope it's a clear question. And then, I keep going back to, in my head, to the, what is it? Pelo ya ka e tshwerwe ke nyoko, nyoko e phunyegile, and the sort of, I've heard how you've described the pieces that we watched. I kept thinking about, particularly with Ledombolo, multi-vocality, the dialogue versus the poetry versus the recorded sound. And I was looking at like inadequate tools for making Ledombolo, like a whisk and, and thinking about your notion of hosting being such a, like, of course it's gonna get stuck in there. So I kept having to like breathe and, and then, and then when you now had to kind of take apart the tool itself in order to get to the food that you're trying to make for yourself. I wondered about sacrifices that are made in creating the home, because you've got the for lack of a better word, on the table is not as a tapete. You've got that, and then you've got the lace on top of it. Yeah, so that beauty of the presentation that comes with, so this is how I present myself, but over there, I'm actually going through quite a lot to unpack the fact that I actually am preparing myself and preparing the home for you. The Dikilana, and that taking out of the, it's what it is, the shit from in these gloves, and so I wanted to also find out a bit more about how you arrived at your symbols, and how those relate to a reclamation, I suppose, of the living room, away from the guest and for the self. And then I'll stop there because I think I've talked too much, and I think we only have the time for the questions to be answered and to say goodbye because of the next panel. So whoever wants to go first can go first.
Maybe I can go first if no one wants to go first. Is that okay? I think these are just very, very brilliant questions, and they make me feel like my work is seen because you're really engaging with it. So maybe we can start with the inadequate tools of making Ledombolo. So, initially when I was picking these tools, I was just thinking about what is going to make the recipe fail. The overall objective of making Ledombolo was so that it fails, which is why the plaster of Paris becomes important, because I just wanted to speak to the difficult time of making space for ourselves when, we're so encapsulated in being there for other people, loving other people, being a mother, being a wife. But also I realized after watching the work that, but it is true, to begin with, we as Black women, we are given inadequate tools by the system to survive through the system. So was set up for failure to begin with. You know, how am I going to find time for baths and salt baths and pedicures and whatever makes me happy to be there for my friends when I'm caught up in surviving in a system that doesn't work? I'm a single parent, I'm in an abusive relationship. The tools just don't work. It's not a me thing, you know, maybe not holistically. And then the second thing being that the beauty of the presentation. I'm my grandmother's daughter after all, and she was very, very, very obsessed with a beautiful home. Everything was just clean, white sofas, white walls, this. So I think I definitely get that from her, but it's exactly that, you know, I offer all of these things. I invite you into my home. I'm so preoccupied about making it perfect, making sure that you're well fed, but I do not have the means to do all of this. And this is something that my research paper was also talking about it wasn't only about the objects, how we reserve certain objects for visitors but don't get to use them ourselves, but it was also about the economics of hosting a guest in a home, and that guests can also really more than we can offer. And so also happens in love, because I'm also exploring the domestic space being the kitchen and the lounge area, as well as the heart space, you know, and I'm drawing similarities to these. I don't want to take up too much time because I think other people also want to answer. So I think I'll just end it there.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, I can answer. Sure. So I'm thinking also about the analysis that you saw in terms of the male being present in the search. And one of the interesting things that I've found is that Goku Tabang, right, her grandson is doing photography and he's doing really well with photography. Tidiso's son also has also taken up that legacy and is doing photography. And then Ruth's son, he's a page designer, but he also interacts with photography. And all these three photographers have daughters. As you heard with Goku Tabang, her daughter started photography, but then she went to work, and then after that left photography and then left it to her son. So that's also one of the things that I'm also trying to engage with on why are they the daughters are sort of leaving the photography sort of I think also Mema Tidiso spoke about how her daughters love photography, that she bought albums for her daughters, but it's sort of like it stops there. And when I had my interview with Ruth, she spoke about how she's teaching her daughter about photography, how to sort of, when she leaves this earth, what is she going to do with, does she understand what is she going to do with her work at the end of the day? So Ruth is in the process of scanning her negatives and digitizing them, and eventually she's going to do a book, which I'm really excited about and pushing her to do. So she's busy with that. And then when it comes to Mema Tidiso and Goku Tabang, they have lost many of their negatives. And it goes back to them not, at the time, they didn't understand the importance of the negatives. Mema Tidiso says they've moved places quite a lot of times, and the people that they lived with just threw them away. And I think also looking in my own family, we have thrown away a lot of negatives as well, because they're just gathering dust. Like, what is the whole purpose of having this? And it's sort of like the printed image becomes more important than the negatives, not knowing that the negatives has other images which are not printed. And so for what I've spoke about through my research and thinking about now, how am I going to assist the photographs that Goku still has and Mematidiso still has, because they have more prints than the negatives. So the plan is to also scan those prints that they still have, digitize them, perhaps have an exhibition so that their work is seen, and include them also in my thesis, so that, you know, people that are going to read the thesis will see the kind of work that they do. Hopefully the work also inspires them, because I felt that, you know, had I known about them when I started photography, I was probably going to look at photography through a different eye, because already I'm seeing the images that they have, I'm already starting to see how my photography is sort of changing, my eye is sort of seeing different. And I'm also grateful for platforms such as this, so that I can also get ideas on how can we now further preserve the work that is there. You know, so I'm hoping that it will open up people that have any ideas or know of, you know, how can we best preserve the work, but also not preserve it, but make it available for students and artists and anyone, right? People in the community to actually see the work and view the work and know that, you know, Gokwako next door was a photographer and she created beautiful images. So yeah, I'm open.
Sorry, I have to stop you. But thank you. I think you were wrapping it up there quite nicely.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was wrapping it up.
Thank you, Sia.
Yes. So for me, I want to start with the phrase of deputy parenting, because I actually came up with the phrase that you know, when the principal member is not there, there's always a deputy. And sometimes, you know, deputies don't necessarily want to build on positivity or build on how to help build something. Deputies are mostly there to overly criticize. So for me, that's where deputy parenting really came from. I don't know if that term exists anyway, but it's mine. So yeah, so as well as, you know, when I was doing research on this, it really hurt me because on the African context, because you know, when teenage pregnancies are spoken about, and you know, when grandmothers or family members take over the parenting of the infant, it's always spoken in conjunction to HIV and AIDS pandemic, and the negative connotations that has to poverty. Whereas, you know, if you take out research from overseas, you know, like the UKs and the Americas, you know, it's more like, you know, a psychological, mental, you know, what will this do to the child? What does this do to the teenage mother who then, you know, is going through the notions of her body, knowing that she's a mother, but then, you know, her mentality is told that she's not. And, you know, in the midst of all of this, I'm asking myself, you know, why is the debate about this in an African context based in a negative manner that, you know, on promiscuity, like, oh, like, it's almost like, you know, the papers were saying that, you know, African young girls are out here, you know, having wild, unprotected sex, and they're loving it with no authority or education or the knowledge to the HIV and AIDS pandemic. And then, you know, when you cross over into the first world, it's basically not there. It's like something that's, you know, not even touched on the papers that I've read, and I've read 5. So I was like, oh, everyone here, you know, in the first world context is talking about, you know, just the financial and the, you know, mental burden on the teenage mother, but not so much, you know, on the what if, you know, what about, you know, the STIs, the HIVs, whereas, you know, here in Africa, we're being ridiculed, you know, when we, you know, our bedrooms are being policed, basically.
And
so for me,
are you saying then that then your paper then becomes a form of protest? Your research becomes a form of protest?
Yes. In that form, yeah. So in that form, that is the protest. That is me holding my breath, you know, and I can't, you know, it's almost like an anger that comes. You
Okay.
know, I also touch on the notion that, you know, many kids, you know, are byproducts of rape, but never really know. You know, you're out here, you're living your best life. You know that your real mother is your grandmother, and you know your birth mother is just, you know, the woman who gave birth to you. You know, so, and no one bothers really to tell you on how this traumatic event, you know, as you are growing up, who is, you know, your mother looking at? Who are you? Who's the space that is invading her space? You
Okay.
know, so it's kind of, the papers did not touch on that, the trauma, because, you know, especially, you know, from the 90s upwards, parents did not believe their daughters, or were willing, or were not willing to believe their daughters. If I came home and I was pregnant, the first thing, you know, there was no form of sex education. You were not getting life orientation in classes. Your parents were not teaching you about sex, you know, sex education, because everyone thought that, you know, you would not know this. So as a matter of fact, it grew a culture of men becoming predators. You know, I have a friend of mine, and she said, you know, her mother was told
So
by her
sorry,
father.
Siane, can I ask this to be your final point, just because of the next panelists that are coming? But yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so you know, like, yeah, so her mother was told by a grown man, you know, come buy a drink with me. And by the time they were done buying this drink, the mother was pregnant. But no one asked her what happened. It was more of, you felt pregnant. It was an expectation that this child knows what sex is. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I actually wish we had like 2 hours, because I have a lot more other questions for all of you, actually. But thank you very much for your presentations. I think it's actually quite interesting how grandmothers are the sources for the inspirations for your researchers. And I think you know, something about each one of you's grandmothers created an opportunity for you to encounter the world differently, to ask the world certain questions. And I find that quite exciting, that these repositories of knowledge that we've kind of left lying around are now like rising up and saying, look, we have knowledge, and you're using that knowledge to actually stop the absence of our existence in the academic sphere and in the world that we operate and work within. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the, you see followers up there, so that means I'm also running over time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the funders. And I really enjoyed talking to you. I would like to see if we can talk some more. Thank you.